In this video, we'll be covering how to make an animation controller and set up this simple animation using Verse. To begin, let's start by opening a new project. For this demonstration, I'll be using the blank template provided by Epic. The first thing we'll want to do is create a prop. Any prop will work. I'm going to go ahead and use the wood crate that is part of Fortnite here. This wood crate 01. Drag that into the level. Next thing we're going to want to do is create our Verse device. So we can do that by going up to our Verse Explorer, right-clicking on our project, and adding new Verse file to project. I'll go ahead and leave this as the Verse device. I'll set the device name to Animation Controller Demonstration. And we're going to go ahead and click Create. From there, we can go ahead and open our Visual Studio. Once you have the file open, you'll see it's just a normal template that Epic provides for us. So we'll go ahead and delete some of these comments here. I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting just to make it how I like it. You can leave yours however you want. I generally like to add curly brackets, and I'll go ahead and do that for my onBegin function as well here. And I'm just going to remove this temporary code. A little more formatting here. Alright. So, next thing we're going to want to do is expose our prop into the Verse code here so that we can select it in our Verse device. We'll do this by adding the editable tag, defining our prop's name, just going to call it prop for the time being, setting it to type creative prop, and instantiating that as a empty creative prop. From there, let's go ahead and jump back into Unreal Engine, UEFN, to compile our code. Once we're in UEFN, we can go ahead and build our Verse code. And when we open our Explorer, we'll see that in our project name, we have our Creative Devices folder created, and we'll go ahead and just drag that into the level. From here, you can see that our prop is now exposed, and we can go ahead and just select the prop, or alternatively, we can use the picker, and we'll just pick the actor right here. Now that these are linked, we'll go ahead and do some code. We'll hop back into Visual Studio Code here. In Visual Studio Code, we'll start by first getting the animation controller from the prop. To do this, we're going to do an if statement, as the animation controller is a failable method, so we'll want to first throw it into a failure context, such as an if statement. The syntax for this is prop.get animation controller and 2 square brackets, because again, it is a failable function. We'll go ahead and open this failure context, and you'll notice that we have a little red line here, and that's because we don't have the creative animation module. So we'll go ahead and implement that using fortnite.com/devices/creative animation. Right on. Now that that's no longer throwing an error, we can go ahead and begin the process. One other thing we're going to want to do is keep track of that animation controller. So we're going to do AC is equal to this. Now our AC object is going to be populated with our animation controller, and from there we can do some work with it. Before we do any work with the animation controller, let's go ahead and take a look at what the animation controller has for us and what we can expose. If I control click on Get Animation Controller, it'll take us to that method definition here. And from there we can control click on the animation controller object to see the actual object here. In this object, we have a few methods as well as some events that we can listen to. For now, the only ones we're going to care about is setting our animation and playing our animation. So the first thing we're going to want to do is look at set animation. This is going to be the way to populate our animation into the controller. So we can go ahead and see at what this takes. Now this takes an array of these keyframe delta objects, as well as a mode of this animation mode, and this is an enumerable. We'll get to this in a second. For now, let's focus on this keyframe delta object. In the keyframe delta object, it is a struct, and it has a few different fields here, members. We have delta location, delta rotation, delta scale, time, and interpolation type. For this demonstration, we're only going to be worrying about the delta location and the time. We'll have to throw the delta rotation in there, but it's not necessary that we provide it with an actual rotation. Hopping back into our code, let's go ahead and make an array of these delta keyframe objects. So we'll start by just defining one. We'll call it keyframe, and it's going to be of type keyframe delta. And we'll look at what it wants, and we need to define, of course, these delta location, delta rotation, and time member. So we'll start with the delta location. And it's going to take a vector 3. We'll leave that as a blank vector 3 for the time being. We'll also need a delta rotation, which is just going to be a blank rotation for the time, and a time value, and we'll just set that to 1 second. Now, as you can see, we have a few errors here, and that's because we are not including the spatial math module, so we'll go ahead and include that real quick using unrealengine.com/temporary/spatial math, and that should solve that problem. Now let's go ahead and fill out some of this. Like I said earlier, we don't need to worry about the delta rotation, as we're just going to leave it as the default rotation. But we are going to move the prop up and down, so we'll want to define a value that's up in the air. Something to note is that these values are relative, so it's not a position in space necessarily, but a position in space compared to the last keyframe. And when you go to set a animation, it will actually generate the first keyframe at the position of the prop. So we don't have to worry about the first initial location, but simply the location after. In our case, we want that prop moving up and down, so we'll just set a Z value here. We'll set this to 500. Again, we can leave this delta rotation as just a blank rotation, as we're not wanting to rotate the object at all, and we have our time value there. The next thing we're going to want to do is assign this animation to the controller. So we'll go ac.setAnimation, and as expected, we need our keyframe delta array object. So we'll just make an empty array at first and populate it with our keyframe. And the next thing we want is this animation mode. Now, something to know about this animation mode is that even though if we look at our set animation function here, we see that the animation mode has this question mark, and this just means that it's a optional parameter. We don't need to include this parameter, and by default it will use the first available enumerable from this object. And if we take a look at that, we can see it's a one-shot. This means it will stop playing after the animation, stop playing the animation after one go. Instead, we want this ping pong. This says reverse direction after reaching the final keyframe delta, then play the animation in reverse. So essentially, we'll just go back and forth between two keyframes, the one we create and the one that's created by the animation controller. Hopping back into our verse code, in order to assign this mode, even though you would think you'd just be able to do animation mode.pingpong, this will actually throw an error, and that's because with optional parameters in verse, you actually have to define the parameter you're talking about. So we'll do question mark, because it is an optional parameter, mode, and we'll instantiate that as this object. Once we've done that, we can go ahead and safely call ac.play, and from there we can pop back into UEFN. Once we're back in the editor, we can go ahead and build our verse code. And we'll need to push changes, as the last time we updated the level, we assigned this prop, so we'll have to push the entire changes to the project instead of just the verse code. So I'll come back to you once that's finished. Now that we are up to date and we're back in Fortnite, we can go ahead and start our game. And we'll see that our box starts animating. And that's how you create a simple animation inside of Verse. Now, we didn't cover every aspect of the animation controller, but we will cover that in the future videos. Thanks for watching.